Today we have with us the Honorable Randall Woodfin, Rich Bielen, and Reverend Dr. Robert Turner. Randall L. Woodfin was sworn in as the 30th Mayor of Birmingham, Alabama on November 28, 2017. A native of Birmingham and graduate of Cumberland School of Law, Mayor Woodfin is an attorney and former president of the Birmingham Board of Education. Throughout his career, he has worked in various positions for the city of Birmingham, which is why he's committed to bringing a new vision, a new dedication, and a new energy to a city where he wants citizens to have every opportunity to work, play, and grow to their fullest potential. Rich Bielen is President and Chief Executive Officer of Protective Life Corporation. He joined Protective Life in 1991 with responsibility for the company's securities portfolio and became Chief Investment Officer and Treasurer in 2002. He became Vice Chairman and Chief Financial Officer in 2007. In January 2016, Mr. Bielen was named President and Chief Operating Officer. On July 1st, 2017, he became the President and Chief Executive Officer of Protective. Bielen serves as Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees for Children's of Alabama. He earned his Master of Business Administration and a Bachelor of Science degree from New York University. We also have with us Reverend Dr. Robert Richard Allen Turner, and he is the pastor of historic Vernon AME Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which has the only edifice that survived the 1921 race massacre on Greenwood. Additionally, Dr. Turner is now the academic dean for Jackson Theological Seminary in Little Rock, Arkansas. He sits on the National African American Reparations Commission, Board of Trustees for the American Village, the 1921 Race Massacre Centennial Commission, Tulsa Mass Graves Oversight Commission, President of the historic Greenwood Main Street District, the Board of Directors for the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, North Tulsa Task Force, Demanding a Just Tulsa, and the Advisory Board for the Blackburn Institute. And he is the chairman of the board of the Turner Ministry Association. Thank you, everyone. And I'll turn it over to Kathryn and our panelists.
Thank you very much, Allie, for that terrific introduction. And I'm so honored to be here today with Mayor Woodfin, Mr. Bielen, and Dr. Turner. We know that this summer has been one of a lot of turmoil. A lot of our members have been experiencing fear and pain and uncertainty and outrage. But at the same time, I think in this, at this time when we come together and we organize, we can find joy in one another. We can inspire each other to do great things. So I'm really looking forward to using this panel as an opportunity to find those ways in which we can improve our communities. So our first question, and this is for each of our panelists. Each of you are experienced and lead different types of organizations. Mayor Woodfin, a city, Mr. Bielen, a corporation, and Reverend Turner, a church, a faith organization. So think about these questions in terms of the organization that you run and that you lead. So briefly, in terms of working toward racial equity, what was your organization doing before the protests resulting from Mr. George Floyd's death? And how has your organization been affected by that movement? I'm going to start off with Mayor Woodfin, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. Let me start by thanking the Blackburn Institute for allowing me to be a part of this panel with President Bielen, as well as Reverend and Dr. Turner, who are, two great men who are really, really good at what they do. City of Birmingham is a city with a rich history. I think we have a very storied history. We know that it's part of its history is that the city governed with the clenched fist instead of an open hand towards all races. I've been the mayor for almost 3 years now, and prior to George Floyd's death and the racial tension in our country, we have made it a priority to engage in racial equity and social justice. The first thing we did, and when we came in office right at 100 days, was we created for the first time ever the actual mayor's office of social justice and racial equity, where we actually hired a team of people whose only job every day when they woke up and came into the office was to focus on social justice issues and racial equity in our city. You should know part of the city of Birmingham's history. When you fast forward to 2020, our city is not only 73% Black, but it's the fourth Blackest city in America. That in itself is something to celebrate. But separate from that, there are many issues, issues as it relates to the wealth gap, issues as it relates to the amount of poverty in the city, which is at 29%, and so many people who are unemployed, et cetera. And so we have focused on how have we focused on closing that gap? But once we created that office, we immediately looked to the youngest generation. And part of what we wanted to do is create a path for young people to be able to go to college, which majority of them will be first generation. In addition to that, if they chose to go to college or university, not have to worry about any debt. And so we created what's called the Birmingham Promise, which is now a public-private partnership, not only supported by the private sector here, but any high school graduate of Birmingham City Schools can now attend an in-state 2-year, 4-year public university or college free of tuition. No questions. The only requirements are they live in our city limits and they graduate from our school system. You're talking about a school system that's literally over 90% Black. And when you speak to the conversation of racial equity, you have to create paths and opportunities to close the gap and make sure young people are given opportunity. So those are some of the things we were doing prior to George Floyd's death.
Thank you very much for that, Mayor Woodfin. Next, Mr. Bielen, could you please comment on that question?
Kathryn, thank you to the Blackburn Institute for having me. And it's really an honor, as I mentioned to you before, to be able to be on this panel with Mayor Woodfin and the Reverend Turner. You know, Protective, for everybody's knowledge, is over a century old. And if you come into our building, you'll see values on our walls and in our open spaces. And we talk about doing the right thing, serving people, building trust. And so we've always been an organization that is focused on including everybody in terms of creating success. And you'll probably hear me over this conversation really talking about creating opportunity for people. You know, before all this started, one big step that we took moving forward, and diversity and inclusion's always been a part, is that back in October of 2018, we actually created a much broader diversity and advisory committee at Protective. And it was young, old, male, female, Black, white. We were trying to really bring about a change within the organization and recognize that we needed to continue to be more inclusive. And they have worked on creating a strategic roadmap for the organization. And their charge is really to provide the accountability and help us manage our diversity and inclusion program. The second thing that I've done personally, and I will tell you, I probably didn't even fully appreciate it at the time, but I was one of the first CEOs in the state of Alabama to sign the CEO Action Pledge for Diversity and Inclusion. And that pledge was really a very visible and important demonstration of our commitment to diversity, inclusion, and opportunity in the workplace. And the first commitment of the pledge says it will create a culture that is trusting and safe, a place where we can have complex and sometimes difficult conversations about diversity and inclusion. And in the period of this crisis, one of the things I've really done is try to elevate our conversations within the organization. And I will tell you, 2 years ago, it wouldn't have been a part of a topic of a town hall or otherwise, but it is today. And I think that's so important to be able to open up, recognize what's going on, and frankly, acknowledge the anxiety, the pain, and the anger that many people feel as we've seen all the issues of racial injustice over the past few months that's been going on for decades, but really has been highlighted here in this current crisis.
Excellent, Mr. Bielen, thank you. And Dr. Turner.
First of all, I want to say roll tide. That's a phrase I can't say a lot here in Oklahoma. So really appreciate the Blackburn Institute and to all of this this wonderful body. I'm so honored to be here amongst such wonderful leaders in this country, such as Mayor Randall and CEO Mr. Bielen. This is work that the Black church especially has been engaged in well before the murder of George Floyd. Unfortunately, we were birthed in this struggle, right? So it's nothing new for us to fight for racial equity. I mean, before we could even vote in municipal elections or statewide elections, we gave enfranchisement to our members, you know, so before we could vote for mayor, a city council, or governor, we would vote for church trustees, right? And so the Black church has really been an incubator for democracy for the African-American community since our inception. So we have done really what we've always done. It is just now the difference is since the murder of George Floyd, we have more allies, right? People have seen, you know, mass suffering that before now they hadn't seen. I mean, we've had, unfortunately, in this country, periodic events of racial terror, but to see the neck from a police officer on an unarmed civilian for over 8 minutes was traumatizing. And so what we've seen since George Floyd is a lot more allies from people who don't look like us. But this work is not new to the Black church, and especially out here in Vernon, where we suffered in 1921 from the worst race massacre in American history. And it was the Black church that rebuilt, right? I'm sitting in the sanctuary of our church that rebuilt. I'm sitting on top of the basement that survived the race massacre of 1921. Unfortunately, the Black community, especially the Black church, has grown used to racial terror. And we have found ways to survive and thrive in spite of. But I'm thankful that since the murder of George Floyd, we've been able to see more allies come and march alongside us and fight alongside us for true racial equity.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you setting the stage by talking to us about the educational opportunities that you're providing within Birmingham, that roadmap for increased diversity, equity, inclusion at your company, and also that continued fight for democratizing America and the Black church. I appreciate that. My next question follows up with that. So since the movement began, since George Floyd's murder, and we saw all the protests that have resulted from that, what is the most meaningful action that you have taken with or on behalf of your organization regarding social equity? And also, what actions do you still hope to take? Let's start this question off with Mr. Bielen, please.
Thanks, Kathryn. I'll start off with, we've taken a few small steps here. First is we have made a big effort to increase the transparency of our diversity and inclusion efforts. I think that's been very important to getting to the entire employee base. As the mayor knows, we're big supporters of our community. We've focused on things from cultural to racial to education over the years to supporting small businesses. That's through our foundation. We've actually taken a step here to evaluate where our foundation dollars should be going as we move forward, and are very focused on helping the community, especially around raw needs. We just recently committed some more dollars to childcare for healthcare workers or people in need, and continue to investigate the issues of need in the community and to support the educational efforts around these things. I think with respect to the company, probably the biggest thing we've done is accelerate our inclusive leadership training. As I mentioned, we created this advisory committee. We had put the senior leadership through unconscious bias training. But then we said, we need to really accelerate this within the whole organization. And the feedback from our leadership has been extraordinary. When we put it out to our team, literally we got a 99% positive response rate in registering. And if to get 99% out of anything is incredibly strong in terms of how the employee base has recognized. And so this training was developed actually months ago before the process, but we've accelerated to making sure our leaders are comfortable with being uncomfortable. These are not always comfortable conversations for people in an organization to wind up recognizing what's going on. So we want to make sure we continue to establish that inclusive environment. And anyone who's ever worked with me knows I'm a very collaborative leader. I try and bring everybody together. And so to me, it's very, very important because I by myself can't do it, but the organization does have power, and the power of our people to be inclusive is what will make a difference on the community.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next, Reverend Dr. Turner. I think you still might be muted.
Well, one of the things that since post the murder of George Floyd, God has blessed and opened up an avenue for is because of these new allies that have seen racial terror up front, close, broadcast throughout the world. There have been many opportunities to share and to not just be on the activist side, but on the advocacy side in making systemic change. And so that's one of the things that I can say has been a truly blessing from this, is to be invited by organizations and corporations to come and help be a part of some solutions. So that's a new avenue that recently God has kind of veiled to me and others who are in similar situations to be able to come in, maybe not to Protective Life, but to another corporation, and to speak to how that company can be more diverse and racially inclusive, and to speak to nonprofits and entities, and even in white churches, right, on how as a society we can come and rise together and fight America's original sin, which is racism. And so that's one of the things that I have seen as a positive. It's still nowhere near where it needs to go. We still don't have government policy in place on every level, from the national level, especially to the state and local. But there are pockets in America and in corporate entities and nonprofits that are trying to, change some of their bylaws and change some of their institutional practices. And I've been blessed to be a part of a lot of those as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. And now Mayor Woodfin, also would you comment on that question, the most meaningful action that you've taken since the murder of George Floyd?
Oh, no, if I can isolate it to one thing. So I promise I'll be succinct in sharing the following, because they're all a tie. I think we start with symbolism because that's important. We took down a Confederate monument statue that was the center of attention in our city, that caused some of the unrest in our city. It was important to do. But then the tangible things we did were in order. Internally with our police department, we opened up an investigation into how our police department engages our community. And currently, still right now, there is a panel of people who are all civilians and volunteers who are taking a deeper dive into our policies and procedures of how we engage our community from a policing standpoint. The other thing we did was engage our CEO and corporate community by simply saying that these conversations that have been had at the C-suite level, as well in the boardrooms, we need to make tangible in the sense of how does corporate Birmingham engage Black-owned, women-owned, and minority businesses. And so by January, we'll be submitting a public report to the public, and corporations have voluntarily participated in this program of how they are creating equity from the standpoint of engaging those businesses from a actual business standpoint and relationship. The third piece is we are actually engaging now in a disparity study. how the city of Birmingham does business with Black owned, with women owned, with minority business.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I see places for all of us to be able to plug into this movement, no matter what level you're at, if you're a student, if you're a fellow advisory board member, if you're young or old. I think that we can all think about how we might improve the transparency of the work that we are doing, the strategic analysis of what needs to be done and address those problems, and think about how we can be allies and advocates, making both symbolic changes and then substantial changes as well. So thank you for sharing those things and giving us some things for our community to think about where we might plug in. My next question is how you kind of deal and work through in this time. There are some people who might not agree with what exactly you're doing. Some individuals might think that your racial equity leadership is either too extreme, or on the other side, maybe it's not aggressive enough. So how do you work with that as a leader? And let's start with Reverend Dr. Turner for this question, please.
Thank you, Kathryn. I want to first of all commend Mayor Woodfin in what he did, being a former resident in Birmingham and still having some business interests there. The fact that, and being originally from Tuskegee, a city that has its own Confederate statue, what he did in removing that Confederate monument, I know he got a lot of flack for it, but I just want to tell you, brother, we appreciate you, and I thank God for your strength. I know it was not easy, but nothing right ever is. And so to answer your question, we have a segment of our population that truly does not want to change, that has made it apparent that they want to make America great again. And I'm a student of history, and I'm still trying to find when was America great? Like ever. And so I know that doing this racial equity work, and especially as it relates to racism, like when was America ever great as it relates to racism? When? How I deal with people that don't agree with what I do, I still do it anyway, because I don't take my orders from man. Being a pastor, being a faith leader, I get my work orders from God, right? And I get my job description from him. He outlines my yearly objectives. And so when you don't take direction from man, especially not popular opinion, going in, especially when you read the text, all the prophets in the Bible had opposition, right? The mainstream society never agreed with what was the right thing to be done. So that going in. In fact, if people do agree with you, that should be shocking, so that to me is like a sign, am I really doing what I'm supposed to be doing? But I'll give you an example. Most of you know that I'm a huge advocate for reparations, both from 1619 and from the 1921 race massacre. I go out to City Hall every Wednesday. I was there this past Wednesday, Lord's willing. I'll be there this following Wednesday. Well, one Wednesday, we had a group of anti-mask folks who were down at City Hall. And they were protesting the city's mask ordinance that eventually passed. And I was doing my regular Wednesday City Hall protest. You can see the video on my YouTube channel. And I was harassed. I was assaulted. They threw water on me. They grabbed my arm and tried to take my bullhorn. But through it all, nothing but the grace of God, I was able to continue to say my message. And I think that's a microcosm for how we as a community must be. People may harass you, they may grab you, they may throw water on you, but you must continue to say your message and to stand strong and be brave in the midst of it all, because the battle is truly not ours. And once you realize that, and once you know that, each generation should push to try to make America that more perfect union. And we help the next generation by giving them a leg up and a head start on a place where our previous generation left it to us to continue to carry the torch. I think we will move closer to that great day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. That was very inspiring. I appreciate what you said about the battle is not ours, and I'll carry that with me. Mayor Woodfin, would you please comment on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, Dr. Turner, thank you so much for your words, sir. I really appreciate that. There are two ways to start to answer this. One is by one of my favorite poems called If. It just talks about, keeping your head when all those around you losing theirs and blaming it on you. The other thing is to think about what King talks to about leadership. And when leadership is exposed in times of challenges and controversy, I think the last 6 months in America, the last 6 months in the state of Alabama, the last 6 months in Birmingham, and I dare say the last half year around the entire globe, all leaders have been exposed because we're all in times of challenges and controversy. And how we show up, how we step up, how we respond, and how we communicate with those who follow us and who we're responsible for is extremely important. And I start with the global health pandemic. And just to know that there were so many who disagree with decisions we made, including the state of Alabama and the Attorney General. I then moved to the economic crisis. Again, so many people disagree with some of the decisions we made, including the Attorney General. And then we moved to the issues around civil unrest and the killing of George Floyd. And all of these things taking place, converging all at the same time. Many of you all on this lecture have heard many people say this felt like the combination of the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, as well as the 1968 riots all at the same time. Well, imagine being a leader in the middle of all of that. I think it's important to go back to what I said at first around if and leadership and challenges and controversy. You make decisions that you can sleep with at night. You make decisions that work for the whole, and you make decisions that are right. And you're morally driven to do the right thing by the people you serve. And in those times, of course, you're going to get pushback. You're going to get people that disagree with you. You're going to get racial epithets your way, and all type of threats from the KKK and all of these things. But you continue to do the right thing because at a certain point of time, the youngest generation is looking at all of us. They're looking at Dr. Turner. They're looking at President Bielen. They're looking at me as mayor. They're looking at us in this moments of challenges and controversy. And even if it's not popular, if it's the right thing to do, they'll understand from example, even when times are challenging, I'm going to do the right thing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mayor Woodfin. And I'll definitely take a look at your poem, If. I appreciate the recommendation. And last but not least on this question, Mr. Bielen, could you talk about how you deal with individuals who disagree with you, thinking that you're too extreme or not radical enough?
So I'm going to start with one of our values at Protective, and that is doing the right thing. And I think that is the most important element of all this. I know I don't have all the answers to this question. This is a struggle, as Reverend Turner mentioned, goes back to 1619 as we go back. And so us by ourselves are not going to be able to do it. It's really going to have to be bringing people together. But I'm a very big advocate and feel very strongly about creating opportunity for people. And, I'll just mention my own background. I realize I am a Caucasian male working in a public company. But my background is I'm a child of immigrant parents who were raised Polish Catholic back in they were born in the 1920s. As teenagers, they were taken out of their homes and put into labor camps in Germany, and ultimately were in refugee camps at that time and immigrated to the United States in the mid-50s, sponsored by the Polish American Relief Fund. And one of the big things why I feel very strongly, and whenever I talk about diversity and inclusion and efforts, it's always where I always end with creating opportunity, because I know my family got opportunity. And so when we talk about, I'm doing too much, creating opportunity for others is my way of paying forward, all the things that my family got in the creation that I had today. And so I'm a big believer in us continuing to move forward on that journey. And I know it won't end in a year, and it won't end in maybe even in a decade, but it's about perseverance and that continued effort to create opportunity.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that perspective. My next question, I think Mayor Woodfin had started to address this. We are a leadership and development organization, and we often get questions from our students and even our fellows about leadership style from the leaders that we talk to. And we would love to hear your perspective about leadership style. So if you could please give us an anecdote. Think of a time when you were leading your organization through this crisis and it was extremely challenging. And I wonder if you could share with us that process that you used for making your decisions. What philosophy guided you? Who did you collaborate with? How did you make that final decision? And we'll start off with Mayor Woodfin.
So this is a roundabout way to answer your question, but I promise I'll get to the actual process, who I collaborated with. I like to remind people in my position as mayor, I'm fortunate. I know the shoulders I stand on to be in this position and leading a city. But a lot of that's rooted in my childhood. I like to tell people I grew up in a house. There were never less than 8 people in my home, 4 generations. I sat at the foot of my great grandmother who lived to be 100 years of age, and she was blind from diabetes. So I spent so much time with her, and a lot of that time was spent of more listening than talking. I kept that with me as I grew older, as a teenager and a college student and a law student, and even as a practicing attorney 8 years and now as mayor. I spend more of my time listening than talking. So a large part of my philosophy as a leader in making decisions is to shut up, right? Just listen more. Another portion of it is that is this area around putting people first. I speak to that a lot. So the decisions I make, I'm comfortable with a lot of people's input and being able to process my team, their different opinions, their ideas. When you grow up in a household and there are at least 8 people there, you realize that people see things differently from you. They view things differently from you. They believe things differently from you. And different is okay. Third part of my philosophy is in practicing law. I spent the minimum of 8 hours for 8 years in an adversarial environment. And you learn in that environment that you still got to keep your wits about yourself. You can't let that type of energy drain you. And then you realize you have to work to meet people where they are. And so words like compromise are not a bad word in my world. And so a large part of my leadership style is also meeting people where they are. And so just in short, listening, compromise, as well as accepting people's differences is part of my style. And I like to bring a lot of people to the table, listen to everybody, see the differences, and then make a decision.
Thank you very much. I've heard you say put people first in many different situations, and I gain something new every time I hear it. So I appreciate you repeating that, and I will try to learn from that. I appreciate it. The same question, Mr. Bielen.
So one word I'm going to use here to begin with is communication. The communication that we raised with our organization. We went to monthly town halls. I write a weekly letter. We talked about leadership with our group constantly. And I'm pretty proud. I think we've been able to work through this. But I want to just back up a little bit. I've been through a number of other financial type crises. I worked on Wall Street in 1987 when the markets went down by 20%. I was the CFO at Protective in 2008, 2009, when we saw our stock drop by over 90% during that period of time. This has been different. When COVID hit in March, and just to be clear, it is a real crisis. The number of deaths in this country are running at about 110% of what would normally be expected. So we really do have a health crisis both here and globally. Then the events in May with George Floyd and what we saw, and I give incredible credit to Mayor Woodfin and his leadership. That Monday morning when I woke up and I saw the videos of the riots and the protests across the country and the violence, I was somewhat shaken when I saw that. And our employees were, and we had a leader meeting that morning at 9 o'clock, and I immediately addressed, the names, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, as we spoke at that time, and about communication and recognizing what was going on. And then more recently, it's interesting, employees are very, very anxious and nervous in this crisis. Now it's turned to education. It's whether do I send my child to school or not? How are they going to be cared for? And there's tremendous anxiety as we have. And so one of the key things, I can't solve all of that, and we're going to have to continue to work our way through it. But it's been about communicating with the employees, getting their feedback, getting their feelings, and making sure they're all being heard in this really uncharted time for any of us in our lifetimes.
Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. I appreciate that, Mr. Bielen. And last, Reverend Dr. Turner, can you provide us with some of your decision-making process?
I seek to find the areas of greatest need, guided by the principle the secular world calls service is the rent you pay for living. For those Christians, we believe a similar philosophy, but based in the Gospels, that he who wishes to be the greatest among you must be the servant. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts that there's still a great need for service. One of the things that this church that I pastor, Vernon, that we do every day that was birthed out of a need, came out of COVID-19, which is that we serve food every day, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Ever since shelter in place, membership of less than 150 members, 85% of which are over the age of 65, but we still have served. And we're the only place in Tulsa that's been open every day since COVID-19. And as a result of that, we provided over 140-some thousand meals today. That's not because we were trying to be known. It was just really, we started with just feeding 50 people. And then it just kind of grew on. People saw we were willing to serve. Other people came and started volunteering their time and donating their resources. It truly doesn't take a large number of folks to change the world, just a dedicated few. And so one of my guiding philosophies is finding what needs are not being met, right? And meeting those needs, not even reinventing the wheel. And if somebody is doing something, great. If you can add on, wonderful. If not, find something else that is truly needed. And knowing that you are here not to serve yourself, but to serve others. And I think that that's something that we've lost as a society. This zero-sum game, I have to win, you have to lose. We don't even use terms like public good anymore, general welfare. We don't even use those types of phrases anymore. But that's what this country was birthed on, right? In all her flaws, the Commonwealth of Virginia, like they had an idea of there being this commonwealth, like there was a general good, common ground, common land. I think the mayor said compromise. We don't believe in that. In the church, we have this thing called communion, where there's a common union amongst us. There, we say we live or we want a community, but we are not united on anything. We share nothing in common. Everybody is so much for themselves that I believe that's hurt our society. We have leaders now that want to tweet only about themselves and talk only about themselves and do only for themselves. Right? And when they do something, it's, hey, look at me, look at what I did. When it's good and when it's bad, look at what they did. And I think that that type of politics, that even in interpersonal relationships, when you're with your spouse or your friend, that having to always blame someone for the problem and not trying to just help alleviate the problem, I think is really one of the detriments of our society. So being willing to serve, being willing to clean up a mess you didn't even create. You know, like that's what I have to deal with a lot with social justice issues. We have a generation that says, well, I wasn't here doing slavery. I wasn't here doing Jim Crow. Why should we have to do anything about it? Well, it falls to you unless you want the same problem to fall to your children, right? Because the consequences are not going away by you just ignoring it. And so it falls to us to serve. And the Bible teaches the least of these. And if you want to be great, be the servant. And if there's anyone that's willing to do that, no greater love than this, than to want to lay down his life for a friend. And as we celebrate the I Have a Dream speech on today, let us never forget that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put his life on the line in service. Morehouse graduate, Mayor Woodfin, put his life on the line. He could have been a professor at Princeton. He could have gone to travel the world, but he put his life on the line, on pause for us. And that's one man. Imagine if we had several willing to do the same thing today.
Terrific. Yes, we all do need to think about our roles as servants in this world. And I appreciate those words, Reverend Dr. Turner. We have a little over 10 minutes left right now. And I would love to transition us over to some fabulous questions we've been getting from our audience. And our first question, it comes from one of our fellows, Bob Bielen. Hi, Bob. And his question is a great one for all of us. As leaders at the university and in our respective professions, what is just one small thing that we can implement to lead in racial equity and in social unrest? And I'm gonna pitch that one to Mr. Bielen first to start us off.
So I'm a big believer is it's all about action. So when you ask what's one small thing, I'm a huge advocate of mentorship and education. And so taking someone who needs development, needs help, taking them under your wing and being able to help them along in their journey. People helped me in my career. I always tell a story about when I was getting my first big interview, somebody told me where to go buy a suit, where to buy shoes, how to make sure I dressed the right way for my interview. And those kind of small things of spending a few minutes with somebody to give them that guidance can make a huge difference for their life.
Thank you so much. The next question, the same question to Dr. Turner.
Can you repeat the question again? I just had a birthday.
Yes, I can. We are all getting older, I feel you. Okay, yes, the question is, as leaders at the university and in our respective professions, what's one small thing we can implement to lead in racial equity and social unrest?
I think at the university level, as a former student there are a host of problems. There were problems when I got to UA, and there's still problems today. When I was there, we led a movement to get 2 slaves that were buried on campus bodies recognized, right? And we protested about racial equity and social unrest. I was encouraged to see recently the university decided to change the name of a building, Bibb Graves, to John Lewis, which is great, right? But even then, there's still more things that can be done, right? I don't have to even mention the Machine, which is a terrible organization that needs to greatly be reformed or eliminated at best. But even once you graduate, I would say don't stop looking for ways. The most important thing, though, is to organize and be persistent. Whatever you find yourself fighting, if your adversary knows that, give it a weekend and you all are boiled down. Give it a football game and you all forget all about it. Give it to homecoming and they will be, distracted by something else. then it won't survive, right? And that's one of the cons about being on a college campus. They know at best you're going to be there 4 years. And if they can wait you out, they will. So be persistent. And as President Bielen mentioned, mentor, pass down what you're working on, what you're doing, because you know at best you're going to be there 4 years, unless you were kind of like a party person and stay 5 or 6. But at best, you're trying to be there 4 years. And so pass down what you're working on, pass down what you're learning, so that the next class of students coming in can continue to fight, to take that fight and take it to higher levels.
Thank you so much. And Mayor Woodfin, what's one small thing that you would suggest we can do to lead in racial equity and social unrest?
2 things. One is make it mandatory to teach a class on the caste system that was created in America as it relates to white people and Black people. The second thing is very simple. I was a former student leader, SGA president, when I was in undergrad. I found it even in my position as a student leader that as students were looking to me to lead us and be a voice and amplify their issues and concerns, unfortunately, sometimes they still fell on deaf ears. The last thing you all want as adults on campus is for the students to do walkouts or continue protests or not engage in the class because they don't feel the adults are listening to them. Please create an atmosphere where the students feel heard, feel listened, and as adults, you make adjustments and yield to some of the things they need and deserve.
Excellent. I know that that is going to sit well with our students. Okay, one last question before we end it out. And this question comes from our student, Lita Wagner. And she asks, the Birmingham metropolitan area has so many municipalities competing for resources and recognition, which often hinders progress for the area as a whole. How can we combat this us versus them mentality that has prevailed since the white flight of the 1960s? And since you are the mayor of Birmingham, let's start with you, Mayor Woodfin. What would you like to say about this?
Again, that's a great question. I'll start when I came in as mayor. For the first time in a long time, well, first there's an organization called the Jefferson County Mayors Association. Jefferson County, the largest county in the state of Alabama with the largest population, it's the third balkanized county in the nation. I mean, literally, it has over 30 plus municipalities in one county. That lets you know that white flight was very intentional in this county. And it has caused us to compete with each other. But as I stated earlier, I govern with an open hand, not a clenched fist. That includes working with mayors over the mountain, working with mayors to the east of Birmingham, mayors to the west of Birmingham, and with mayors to the north of Birmingham through the association. And we've started working on things that we believe that works for the good of the whole of the county. We started with a year and a half ago, we all signed a pledge called the No Poaching Pledge, which meant that we weren't going to compete with each other and steal a business that was in one city to bring it to our city. Because the truth is we're all driving to the next city as it relates to our place of employment, et cetera. And so of the 30 plus municipalities, I was happy to say 23 of us signed that pledge. The next thing we're working on is a 911 system, where about if you consider the 280 corridor, and Rich knows that area very well because Protective Life is kind of off 280. You have about, I don't know, a minimum of 6 jurisdictions that touch each other. And if President Bielen and Dr. Turner get into an accident and they call 911 and it's on that line, then it doesn't make sense where people saying, well, if one car is in one jurisdiction and the other car is in another jurisdiction, who's going to do the reporting? It's kind of stupid. So we're working on a more comprehensive 911 system that works for the region instead of our individual cities. Those are just 2 examples of regional cooperation. Most people think of the area and want to jump into consolidation, that people want to just disband their cities. That's not going to happen. But you can start with some of the low-hanging fruit around the word cooperation. And that's where we center our energy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mayor Woodfin. And Mr. Bielen, a minute or so, do you have suggestions about how we can get around the us versus them in Birmingham area?
So I want to make this comment on behalf of the Birmingham business community. I think, there is great collaboration among the business leaders. And, it's something when I first got to Birmingham 29 years ago, one of the things that I saw in the local community, and probably related to just the values of protective, a real ownership mentality. We don't look at lines, whether it's the county or the city, in terms of our support. And I think most business leaders are the same way. We really look at it as we want to make the area of Birmingham a more livable place, a more attractive place, a more inclusive place for everyone. And so when issues come up, and Protective's not actually in the city of Birmingham, but Mayor Woodfin and I have texted repeatedly over the years in terms of communication. And I know he has that same connection with the other leaders in Birmingham. And we really focus on the region and making it more attractive to really create more jobs and more opportunities. And I'm looking at it from an economic perspective. And then suggestions that the mayor had. We do have some issues about where are the lines and who's the right police force to wind up getting in there. But I think the real spirit of the whole Birmingham business community is to make the area better and more livable for everyone.
Excellent goal. All right. And the last word, Dr. Turner, you have 1 minute. I know that you don't live in Birmingham right now, but what would you suggest to do to get around the us versus them mentality now?
I spent some of the best years of my life in Birmingham. I think that we need to understand these issues do not create themselves in a vacuum. That it's a reason that it's us versus them. Some parts of us didn't choose to separate to be them, right? And I think it's important to understand that I would not want to be, and I don't envy Mayor Woodfin or President Bielen at all because of the work that they do and have to lead like from this point going forward. But I think as a society, we need to understand the historical instances that occurred to create that us versus them in the first place. This is the city that bombed the church, right, and killed 4 little girls. This is the city that put dogs on human beings, right? And so those folk who were there and that chose not to go to schools like West End because they were being integrated. And I think we need to understand that those folks are still there, and some of their mentality is still there. And we need, in addition to civic leaders such as Mayor Woodfin and business leaders such as President Bielen, we need community and thought leaders to come and help people understand that this is a moral problem, that it doesn't matter what laws Mayor Woodfin produces or what policies President Bielen implements, the hearts of people need to be changed. And that's really, in addition to the policy, in addition to the practices, the hearts really need to be spoken to. So I think it's a 3-pronged approach, and I'm happy that you had me from the church perspective, because it's going to take all 3 of these to eliminate that us versus them mentality.
Thank you so much. I really have appreciated being on this panel with you today, being the moderator. It has been an honor to be with you all. Thank you for your time, and also thank you to all the participants who have been in the audience and the terrific questions you have. To our panelists again, we appreciate the inspiration that you've given us all, and we certainly will heed John L. Blackburn's call to action going forward with this.